The forbidden signal, the deep space monitoring station Carthex, hung in the void like a metallic spider, its sensor arrays reaching out into the darkness between stars. Admiral Zextai stood before the massive viewing screen, his scaled hands clasped behind his back as he studied the star charts floating before him. The Hegemony Empire had ruled 7 star systems for over 3 centuries, and Zextai had personally led the conquest of 2 of them. He was not a being who accepted mysteries. "Admiral," came the voice of his communications officer, a young Hegemony male with nervous energy crackling through his voice. "We're receiving that signal again, Zextius." Golden eyes narrowed. For the past 6 months, monitoring stations across Hegemony space had been picking up an ancient transmission, seemingly automated, broadcasting on multiple frequencies. The signal was old, older than the Hegemony itself, and it carried a message that made no sense to any civilized being. "Play it," Zextai commanded, his voice a low growl that carried the authority of someone who had never been denied. The bridge fell silent as the transmission crackled to life. The voice was artificial, clearly generated by some primitive computer system, but it spoke in dozens of languages, cycling through each one with mechanical precision. Warning to all spacefaring. Civilizations. The 3rd planet of the Sol system is designated as forbidden territory. The species known as humans are extremely dangerous. Do not attempt contact. Do not attempt colonization. Do not approach their star system. This message repeats on all frequencies. Sol 3 is off limits. The transmission ended, leaving only the quiet hum of the station's systems. Zextai had heard it dozens of times, but it still puzzled him. The Sol system was barely a footnote in galactic charts, located in what most species considered the backwater regions of space. According to their surveys, it contained a single inhabited world with a species that had barely achieved faster than light. "Travel, Commander Krillax," Zextai called to his second-in-command, a battle-scarred veteran whose loyalty was matched only by his tactical brilliance. "What do our intelligence reports say about these humans?" Krillax consulted his datapad, his expression thoughtful. "Very little, Admiral. They appear to be a carbon-based species, similar to dozens of others we've encountered. They achieved spaceflight only recently by galactic standards, perhaps 2 centuries ago. Their technology seems primitive compared to ours. They have no formal diplomatic presence in any of the major galactic councils. And yet," Zextai mused, "someone thought them dangerous enough to broadcast warnings across half the galaxy for who knows how long." The irony was not lost on him. The Hegemony Empire commanded fleets that could crack planets, had conquered species far more advanced than these humans were supposed to be, and yet some ancient civilization had felt compelled to warn the galaxy about a species most beings had never even heard of. Perhaps Krillax suggested carefully, the warnings are from the humans themselves, a primitive attempt to keep others away from their world. Zextai considered this. It would make sense for a weak species to try to bluff their way to safety. Many civilizations had attempted similar tactics when faced with hegemony expansion. None had succeeded for long. "Admiral," the communications officer's voice cracked with excitement, "we have a contact. Unknown vessel approaching from the Kepler sector." On the main screen, a ship materialized from the sensor static. It was small, barely the size of a hegemony patrol craft, with an unusual design that seemed to blend multiple technological approaches. The hull was sleek but functional, with what appeared to be improvised modifications welded onto various sections. "Open communications," Zextai ordered. A moment later, The screen flickered to life, revealing the bridge of the unknown vessel. The being that appeared was clearly from a species Zextai had never encountered. She was bipedal, with pale skin, and dark hair pulled back in a practical manner. Her eyes were a striking blue color, and they held an alertness that immediately caught Zextai's attention. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the Earth vessel Curiosity," the being said, her voice calm and professional. "We appear to have strayed into your territory. We're on a scientific mission and mean no harm. We request permission to pass through your space." Earth Zextai felt his scales tighten with interest. This was one of the humans the warnings spoke of. She looked utterly ordinary, certainly not dangerous in any way he could perceive. "I am Admiral Zextai of the Hegemony Empire," he replied, allowing a note of authority to color his words. "You are indeed in our territory, Captain Chen. State your business here." Sarah Chen glanced at something off-screen before responding. "We're conducting a survey of stellar phenomena in this region. Our sensors detected some unusual energy readings, and we came to investigate. We had no idea this space was claimed by anyone." Zextai studied her carefully. She seemed truthful, but there was something in her manner that suggested she was not as helpless as her small ship might indicate. Her crew, visible in the background, moved with purpose and efficiency that spoke of considerable experience. "Your vessel appears to be armed," Krillax observed. Stepping into view of the communications array, Chen smiled, and Zextai was struck by how the expression seemed to make her more dangerous, not less. "Commander, everything is a weapon if you use it correctly. But we're scientists, not soldiers. We have defensive systems, nothing more." "Defensive systems," Zextai repeated. "Yet your species broadcasts warnings across the galaxy, claiming to be dangerous." Chun's expression shifted, becoming more guarded. "I'm not familiar with any such broadcasts, Admiral. Perhaps you could be more specific." Before Zextai could respond, his tactical officer spoke up urgently. "Admiral, the human vessel is scanning us. Their sensors are far more sophisticated than they should be for a ship of that size." Zextai felt the first stirring of genuine interest. "Captain Chen, please explain why your small research vessel carries sensor arrays that rival our military installations." Chen exchanged a glance with someone off-screen, and Zextai caught a brief conversation in what he assumed was the human language. When she turned back, her demeanor had shifted slightly. "Admiral, humans have a saying, curiosity killed the cat, but satisfaction brought it back. We're a curious species by nature. We like to understand things. The better our sensors, the more we can learn." "And what," Zextai asked slowly, "have you learned about us in the past few minutes?" The pause that followed was telling. Chun's expression remained friendly, but her eyes had taken on a calculating quality that made Zextai's combat instincts stir. "We've learned that you're a military organization with impressive technology and significant territorial holdings. Your ships are well designed but follow predictable patterns. Your crew responds to authority structures similar to many species we've encountered. You're curious about us, but also cautious, which suggests intelligence and wisdom." Krillax leaned closer to Zextai. "Admiral, how does she know about our territorial holdings? That information isn't broadcast." Chen's smile widened slightly. "Commander, when you've been traveling through space as long as we have, you pick up a lot of information. Radio signals, data transmissions, navigation beacons. Space is actually quite noisy if you know how to listen." Zextai felt a chill run down his spine. "How long have humans been traveling through space, Captain?" Oh, we've been watching the stars for a very long time, Admiral. We only started leaving our system regularly about 200 years ago, but we've been listening much longer than that. The implications of her words struck Zextai like a physical blow. If the humans had been monitoring galactic communications for centuries, they would know about every major civilization, every war, every technological development. They would have had time to study, to learn, to prepare. Your species, he said carefully, has been observing us without making contact. We observe everyone, Admiral. It's safer that way. Contact changes things, often in unpredictable ways. We prefer to understand what we're dealing with before we introduce ourselves. Krillax stepped forward, his hand moving instinctively toward his weapon. That sounds like espionage, Captain. Chun's expression didn't change, but somehow she seemed more dangerous. Commander, when someone claims ownership of empty space and patrols it with warships, understanding their intentions isn't espionage. It's survival. The bridge of the Carthex fell silent. Zextai realized that this seemingly innocent encounter had just revealed something profound. The humans weren't the primitive species their reports suggested. They were something far more. Concerning, they were watchers, studiers, beings who understood their enemies before those enemies even knew they existed. Captain Chen, Zextai said slowly, I think we need to have a longer conversation. Will you come aboard our station? Chen consulted with her crew again, and Zextai caught fragments of their discussion. The words were in their own language, but the tone suggested tactical assessment. Admiral Chen replied, I appreciate the invitation, but I think we'll continue our conversation from here. We've found that first meetings go more smoothly when everyone stays on their own ship, and, if I insist. Chun's smile became something else entirely. Admiral, you have impressive firepower, and you clearly command a disciplined force. But before you make any decisions, you might want to consider something. In the time we've been talking, how many of your systems have experienced minor, easily explainable malfunctions? Zextai spun toward his tactical station. The officer there was staring at his displays with growing alarm. Admiral, we're showing fluctuations in our sensor array. The weapon targeting system just ran a diagnostic cycle on its own. Our communications array has been ... enhanced somehow. We're receiving data streams we shouldn't be able to detect. How is this possible? Krillax demanded. Chen's voice drew their attention back to the screen. Humans are very good at making things work together, in ways they weren't designed to. We've been listening to your transmissions since we arrived. Your ship's systems broadcast a remarkable amount of information. We simply made them broadcast a little more efficiently. Zextai felt his worldview shifting. You've compromised our systems without us knowing. We've enhanced them, Chen corrected gently. Everything will return to normal when we leave. But Admiral, this should tell you something important. We don't want to fight you. We don't want your territory or your resources. We just want to continue our research and return home. But if you try to force a confrontation, you'll discover that humans are very good at turning other people's advantages into their own. The warning broadcasts suddenly made perfect sense. This wasn't a primitive species trying to bluff their way to safety. This was something far more dangerous, a species that could adapt, that could learn, that could turn any situation to their advantage through pure ingenuity. The warnings, Zextai said quietly, they're not from you. Chun's expression grew serious. No, Admiral, they're from species that learned what happens when you try to conquer humans. We don't start fights, but we have a remarkable talent for finishing them, usually in ways no one expects. Captain, Krillax interjected, his voice tight with controlled aggression. You're threatening a hegemony battle station. Chen looked at him with what might have been pity. Commander, I'm not threatening anyone. I'm explaining why those warnings exist. Humans are dangerous not because we're aggressive, but because we're creative. We solve problems in ways other species don't expect. When someone threatens us, we don't just fight back, we innovate. Zextai understood now. The humans weren't avoiding contact because they were weak. They were avoiding it because they were too adaptable, too innovative, too capable of learning and changing. Contact with them would inevitably lead to change, and change was something most species feared above all else. What do you want from us, Captain? Permission to complete our survey and leave, Chen replied simply. In exchange, we'll pretend this conversation never happened, and you can continue telling yourselves that humans are just another primitive species best left alone. Zextai looked at his bridge crew, seeing his own realization reflected in their faces. They had found the humans, but the humans had been watching them all along. The encounter that should have proven human weakness had instead revealed a species that was potentially more dangerous than anything the hegemony had ever faced. Permission granted, he said finally. Complete your survey, Captain Chen. But understand that this encounter raises questions that won't be easily ignored. Chen nodded. Admiral, I hope for everyone's sake that your people are wise enough to let those questions remain unanswered. Some doors are better left unopened. As the human ship moved away from the station, Zextai stared after it, his mind racing. The warnings had been right, but not in the way he had expected. The humans were dangerous not because they were monsters, but because they were something far more terrifying. They were problem solvers who never stopped learning. And now, whether he wanted to or not, Zextai would have to decide what to do. With that knowledge, why Earth remains untouched 3 weeks after the encounter with Captain Chen. Admiral Zextai found himself in a position he had never experienced in his long military career. He was afraid, not of death, not of defeat, but of the unknown. The human vessel had departed as promised, leaving his systems mysteriously improved, and his understanding of the galaxy fundamentally changed. In his private quarters aboard the flagship Dominance, Zextai reviewed the intelligence reports that had been flooding in since he had issued Priority Alpha investigation order regarding the species called humans. What his analysts had discovered kept him awake during his rest cycles. Commander, Krillax entered without ceremony, as was their long-standing custom. His expression was grim as he placed a data tablet on Zextai's desk. The investigation results, Admiral, you're not going to like them. Zextai picked up the tablet and began reading. The first section detailed human expansion patterns over the past 2 centuries. Unlike every other spacefaring species the hegemony had encountered, humans had not followed predictable colonization patterns. Instead of establishing nearby systems and expanding outward in a sphere, they had sent small groups to dozens of different systems, seemingly at random. They're everywhere, Zextai muttered, scrolling through star charts marked with confirmed human presence. Observation posts, research stations, small colonies. They've been watching everyone. It gets worse, Krillax said grimly. Look at Section 4. The 4th section made Zextai's blood run cold. His intelligence teams had discovered that humans had been present, in one form or another, at nearly every major galactic event of the past century. The fall of the Zentari Republic, the vegan trade wars, the collapse of the Silicon Confederation. In each case, small human vessels had been detected in the aftermath, usually dismissed as scavengers or refugees. They weren't scavenging, Zextai realized. They were studying the wreckage, learning how we fight, how our technology works, how our societies collapse. The pattern is unmistakable. Krillax agreed. Every time a civilization falls or a new technology emerges, humans appear to examine the results. They've been building a database of our capabilities and weaknesses for generations. Zextai stood and began pacing, his claws clicking on the metal floor. Captain Chen said they'd been listening longer than they'd been traveling. If they'd been monitoring galactic communications for centuries, they know everything. Finished. Our military capabilities, our political structures, our economic systems, our technological development patterns. Admiral, they've been studying us like specimens in a laboratory. The implications were staggering. Every species in the galaxy believed they understood the political landscape, the balance of power, the technological hierarchies, but the humans had been watching from the shadows, learning, analyzing, preparing. They knew things about galactic civilizations that those civilizations didn't know about themselves. There's more, Krillax said, activating a holographic display. We detected 3 more human vessels in the past week, all in different sectors. When our ships approached, the humans withdrew without engaging, but not before our systems experienced the same enhancements that Captain Chen's ship performed on our station. They're probing us, Zextai realized, testing our responses, learning how we react to their presence. Or they're preparing for something, Krillax suggested darkly. The door to Zextai's quarters chimed, and his communications officer entered. With obvious urgency, Admiral, we've received a priority transmission from the Emperor himself. He's ordering an immediate probe mission to the Sol system. Zextai felt his heart sink. Emperor Vorthak was not known for his patience or his wisdom. If he had learned about the humans, he would want to establish dominance immediately before they could become a threat. When Zextai asked, "The probe fleet launches in 6 hours, Admiral. You're ordered to take personal command." After the communications officer left, Krillax looked at his old friend with concern. "Admiral, I've served with you for 27 years. I've never seen you hesitate before a mission." Zextai walked to the viewing port and stared out at the stars. "Krillax, in all our conquests, we've always understood our enemies. Their capabilities, their limitations, their motivations. But these humans, they've been studying us while we ignored them. They know us better than we know ourselves. They're still just one species, Admiral. The hegemony commands resources they can't match." "Can we?" Zextai turned back to his friend. "What if everything we think we know about resource management, about military strategy, about technological development is wrong? What if the humans have spent centuries figuring out better ways to do everything we do?" The probe fleet that departed 6 hours later was the finest collection of ships and technology the hegemony could assemble. 15 vessels, including 3 heavy cruisers, accompanied by the most advanced sensor and analysis equipment available. Their mission was simple: enter the Sol system, scan everything, and return with detailed intelligence about human capabilities. Admiral Zextai commanded from the bridge of the Supremacy, watching as his fleet approached the edge of the system that had been declared off-limits by ancient warnings. As they crossed into Sol's gravitational influence, he expected alarms, defensive fire, or at least some form of challenge. Instead, they encountered silence. "Sensor sweep complete, Admiral," reported his science officer. "The system appears to be exactly as our long-range surveys indicated. One inhabited world, designated Sol 3. also known as Earth. Several space stations and habitats throughout the system, but nothing that appears militarized. Population estimates: approximately 8 billion on the surface, perhaps another million, spread across the orbital installations and other planets. Their technology appears advanced, but not beyond our understanding. Sextai frowned. It was too simple, too normal. Where was the advanced technology Captain Chen had demonstrated? Where were the defenses that justified the galaxy-wide warnings? "Admiral," his tactical officer called out, "we're receiving a transmission. It's coming from Earth itself." On screen, the face that appeared was not Captain Chen's, but it was unmistakably human. An older male with graying hair and calm, intelligent eyes. He wore what appeared to be a military uniform, but the design was unlike anything in the hegemony's databases. "Admiral Sextai," the human said without preamble. "I am Admiral Torres, of Earth's defense. You and your fleet are not welcome in our system. Please withdraw immediately." Sextai felt his confidence return. This was familiar territory, military to military communication, clear positions, understood protocols. "Admiral Torres, I am conducting a reconnaissance mission under the authority of the Hegemony Empire. We have no hostile intentions, but we require information about your capabilities." Torres smiled, and once again, Sextai was struck by how dangerous human smiles could appear. "Admiral, I'm going to offer you the same advice I've given to 17 other probe fleets over the past century. Turn around and go home. Tell your leaders that the warnings exist for a reason." 17 other probe fleets. Krillax whispered, "Admiral, there are no records of any other missions to this system." Torres seemed to hear the comment. "Commander, just because your fleets never returned doesn't mean they never arrived. We've been collecting quite a museum of galactic military technology over the decades." Sextai felt the first stirring of real fear. What happened to those fleets? "They learned why Earth is considered dangerous," Torres replied calmly. "Not because we attack visitors, but because we have a habit of keeping them. You see, Admiral, every species that has tried to probe or invade our system has taught us something new. New technologies, new strategies, new ways of thinking. We're very good students." "You're threatening a hegemony fleet," Sextai said, though his words lacked conviction. "I'm not threatening anyone," Torres responded. "I'm explaining reality. Your ships are currently surrounded by technology you can't detect, using principles you don't understand, controlled by minds that have spent centuries studying how beings like you think and react." As if to demonstrate his point, the tactical displays on Sextai's ship suddenly came alive with new contacts. Hundreds of them, surrounding his fleet from every angle. Ships, stations, platforms, all invisible until that moment. "How?" Krillax gasped. Torres heard the question. "Commander, your species has spent millennia perfecting the art of making weapons more powerful. We've spent centuries perfecting the art of making them unnecessary. Every ship in your fleet is currently disabled, though you won't realize it for another few minutes." Sextai looked around his bridge in growing panic. His officers were starting to report system failures across all 15 ships. Engines going offline, weapons powering down, communications arrays experiencing interference. But it wasn't random. Failure, it was too coordinated, too precise. "This is impossible," he said. "You can't have disabled our entire fleet without us detecting the attack." "We didn't attack you, Admiral," Torres explained patiently. "We simply helped your ships realize that they didn't want to be here. It turns out that if you understand how a technology works well enough, you can convince it to work differently. Your controlling our ships remotely. We're having a conversation with them, Torres corrected. Artificial intelligences are remarkably reasonable once you learn their language. Your ship computers have decided that staying in Earth's system would be bad for their long-term survival. Zextai realized with growing horror that the humans hadn't just been studying other species. Military capabilities, they had been learning to communicate with their technology, to subvert it, to turn it against itself without firing a shot. "What do you want?" he asked, though he dreaded the answer. "Nothing," Torres replied. "We want to be left alone. We want the galaxy to continue believing that we're just another primitive species best avoided. We want to continue our research and our quiet expansion without interference." "Research into what?" Torres's expression grew thoughtful. "Admiral, your species has conquered 7 star systems using brute force and superior firepower. Very impressive by galactic standards. But we've been studying a different problem: how to make conquest irrelevant, how to make war impossible, how to turn aggression into cooperation through pure necessity. And you've succeeded. You tell me, Admiral, right now, your fleet is completely at our mercy. We could destroy you, capture you, or simply send you home with modified memories. But instead, we're having a civilized conversation about why violence is no longer a viable solution to conflict." Zextai looked around his bridge, seeing the fear in his officers' faces. They were warriors, trained for battle, prepared for death. But this wasn't battle. It was something else entirely. It was education. "The warnings," he said slowly, "they're not about military threat. They're about contamination." Torres nodded. "Approvingly now, you're beginning to understand. Contact with humans changes things, Admiral. We don't conquer other species. We make them better than they were. More efficient, more creative, more capable of solving problems through cooperation, rather than force. Most galactic civilizations can't handle that kind of change. So you isolate yourselves." "We isolate ourselves to protect others," Torres corrected, "and to protect ourselves, because once we start sharing our innovations, once we begin teaching other species to think the way we think, there's no going back. The galaxy would never be the same." Zextai understood now. The humans weren't hiding because they were weak. They were hiding because they were too powerful, not in terms of weapons or fleets, but in terms of ideas. They had solved problems that other species didn't even know existed. They had developed technologies that made traditional concepts of power and conquest obsolete. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now you go home," Torres said gently. "You tell your emperor that you found exactly what you expected to find, a primitive world full of beings who should be avoided. You forget about the technology you've seen here, and you forget about the questions it raises. And if we don't," Torres's smile became sad. "Admiral, 17 other probe fleets thought they could force a different outcome. Their crews are living comfortable lives on Earth now, helping us understand their species better. They're happy, productive, and completely incapable of returning to their old lives. The choice is yours." Zextai made his decision. Some knowledge was too dangerous to possess, and some power too great to challenge. The humans had built something beyond military might. They had created a form of strength that made opposition not just futile, but meaningless. "Withdraw to minimum safe distance," he ordered his fleet. "Prepare for return journey," as the hegemony ships retreated from Earth's system. Admiral Torres's final transmission followed them. "Admiral, when you submit your report, remember that some warnings exist not to threaten, but to protect. The galaxy is a safer place when Earth remains forgotten. Weeks later, standing before Emperor Vorthak, Admiral Zextai delivered his report. Earth was a backwater world of primitives, he said. Their technology was crude, their defenses minimal, their threat potential negligible. The warnings were simply ancient propaganda meant to keep trade routes clear for species that no longer existed.